Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, at the conclusion of day 3 of the NFL draft. Rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the books, and we're trying to give you as much coverage as possible. Look at my YouTube channel. You'll see that I break down picks, the first 10, the middle round of the first round, and then the back end of the first round. Then also struck up the live stream with you just a couple hours ago to knock out round 2. Now we've got Drew Krinsky on the line from Trojan Insider to help us with the USC end of the NFL draft, with 3 Trojans going over the weekend, and then a number of undrafted free agents. So you guys know the drill. If you don't get drafted, it's not the end of the line necessarily. A number of guys will get picked up as undrafted free agents and make NFL rosters. Drew, we appreciate you jumping on board with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Yeah, this is good stuff. So Ronald Jones, what struck me here, let's get started with him in round 2 going to Tampa Bay with pick 38, is that just a few selections prior to that the Cleveland Browns went with Nick Chubb out of Georgia. They're 2 different type backs. Nick Chubb, more of a grinder, not necessarily NFL game-breaking type speed or that kind of wiggle, but he's going to get you the tough yards. He's a hard worker, protects the passer, does all the things that you want, and from a fundamental standpoint, and was explosive at the collegiate level. But when you talk Ronald Jones, you're talking about a guy that can be a home run hitter at the next level. And I thought the Browns kind of missed it there, but he goes to Tampa Bay in a ground game that really needs some help.
Yeah, so Ronald Jones, coming out of high school, was a super quick guy. I remember in the Army All-American game, he took a 79-yard rush all the way. And, his first season at USC, you saw the breakout speed, a lot of raw talent. And then the second year, they try and focus more on making him a running back, reading the offensive line, not just breaking away with speed, but actually dissecting plays and stuff like that. So his second year was kind of a slowdown. It was a transition year for him as he was learning new stuff. But then his third year, that guy put on size, whole different back. I think he was bigger, around 210-ish. No, not 210, but he was bigger, breaking tackles and still showing that speed. So I think he turned himself into an NFL running back. And I think Tampa Bay is lucky to have him. He'll have a chance to start there. There seems to be – it's up in the air in Tampa Bay in terms of running backs. So he can come on there and make an impact early. I think he'll be one of those guys that you'll be seeing with the Fox highlights. Ronald Jones taking the ball 79 yards down the hole. That's the type of running back he is. They call him the Texas Tesla, and he'll be bringing that to Tampa.
You know, Drew, for me, from the first time that I saw Ronald Jones as a freshman, I thought he was electric and thought he was special. The one thing that is interesting for me is that with all the speed and explosiveness, and a guy that they started to count on as their number 1 running back, when some other guys moved on in particular, is that he only caught 32 passes in his career at USC, and only 14 of those in 2017. So this is the kind of home run hitter you would think that they would want to get out into space where he can really do some damage, but just never really turned into a pass catching threat.
Yeah, he early on had a lot of trouble catching the football, and he got better, but he never really mastered the art. So when they were doing screens and out routes like that, they would use Stephen Carr in 2017. And Stephen Carr has wide receiver hands and a speedy running back body. So he was the guy that they used for that kind of threat. But Ronald Jones is capable of catching the ball, and I'm sure they're going to work with him on that.
All right, we got Drew Krinsky on the line from Trojan Insider to help us out with the NFL draft, and in particular, the USC story. And Drew, a Seattle Seahawks fan. So I got to ask you, Drew, how did that happen?
Okay, so my parents lived in Seattle for a while, I'd say 6 years maybe, and they became big Seahawks fans. They lived there at a young age. So from there, they moved to Florida and became Seahawks fans. And we're still Seahawks fans, and I was raised a Seahawk fan, so that's how I got that. And of course, Pete Carroll being there with the USC influence of my life, that kind of cemented everything, and then they started to break out and win.
All right, so elsewhere in the second round for USC, going to the Los Angeles Chargers at pick 48, you've got Uchenna Nwosu out of USC, of course, outside linebacker, 13 pass breakups. defending the pass, #1 stat in the nation for a linebacker. So what I notice here, Drew, is that this kid didn't play a whole lot the first 2 years at USC, became an impact player in 2016, had marginal stats, nice stats, was productive, but then in 2017, he went off the charts and really exploded, really increased his value to be able to go in the top 50 picks of the NFL draft with 75 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, and 9.5 sacks for Nwosu.
Okay, so Nwosu was a guy who came in at 3-star. Nobody really expected too much out of him. And that 2016 year, you started to see him break out. I actually thought both in 2016 and 2017, he was one of USC's best defenders. Constantly getting to the quarterback, getting past anybody, shows a lot of speed off the line, and his ability to read the passes, like you said, I think it was 13 pass breakups or something like that. I mean, he gets his hand up, always knocks the ball down. He just finds a way to get there. And I think he's a guy who will be amazing in the NFL. And I think USC's best defender for the past 2 years. A lot of people would argue that, obviously with the Dory Jackson there. But Uchenna's impact on USC's defense was pivotal.
All right, striking up the live stream here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, where you will find the most complete, comprehensive reporting of college football and instant analysis like we provide you right here with Drew Krinsky from Trojan Insider. Please join him right there for the best in USC football coverage and talking the Trojan impact on the NFL draft with Ronald Jones, Uchenna Nwosu, and now Rasheem Green going in round #3 to the Seattle Seahawks. So, Drew, your thoughts about that?
Rasheem is one big motor. He'll plow through any offensive line guy. And I think he is going to come in a spot where Seattle kind of lost that guy. We have Cliff Averill, who obviously a great player, but he had a neck injury. Seattle doesn't know what the future is on him. So to have a guy like Rasheem Green come in is huge for Seattle. They also took Malik McDonald, I think his name was, 2 years ago from Michigan State. And he had some legal issues, and I think he had an injury on an ATV accident. They ended up cutting him for a number of reasons. So Rasheem Green is also a guy that can come in and fill his role now. And he's excited to be in Seattle.
Rasheem Green in 2017 there at USC with 41 total tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, and 10 sacks, depending on the scheme, depending on what is being asked of the player at that position. You know, when you look at the tackles total versus the disruptive plays, the sacks and the tackles for loss, this is pretty high productivity in the opponent's backfield when you talk about 12.5 tackles for loss and 10 sacks on just 41 total tackles. So Rasheem Green making big plays when he needed to, and a number of those that they showed, Drew, during the videotape on the networks during the draft were during and Nwosu as well during the Pac-12 championship game. In particular, had the lower leg injury that you mentioned with Green, and he'll have to bounce back from that. So in addition to those guys, we're talking about a number of undrafted free agents for this team. And we'll start with Stephen Mitchell with 41 catches last year and 4 touchdowns, 644 yards. And then you can just kind of take us through, because that's what happens. The draft ends, 7 rounds, and then all of a sudden guys are on the phone tracking down particular talents around college football to try to get them into camp and get them signed as undrafted guys. So the story doesn't stop here. So we've got, let's see, 6 USC Trojans signed as undrafted free agents.
Yeah, just 1 sec. Going back to Rasheem Green, you talked about productivity in big games.
Yep.
In the Rose Bowl game, USC was down, I think, 14 points. It looked like Penn State was on the drive that would finish the game off, and he came up with a tackle on Trace McSorley, got the football out, and USC got the ball back. And that play really changed the momentum, gave USC a chance to get back into the game. So that play is big for USC history. All right, so going on to undrafted free agents now. We'll start with Stephen Mitchell. Mitchell was a guy who couldn't avoid injuries. He had, I think, an ACL problem 1 year, had another injury the year before, I think also on the ACL. And he's a guy who really it takes time to recover from those injuries, but he has a lot of speed. He can catch the ball well. We saw some breakout plays from him over the past couple of years. and I think he'll be good with the Rams, especially him and Robert Woods linking up. I think he has a chance to come on and really impress the team. He has that breakout speed to get past a cornerback, so he could be useful. I guess going into Nico Falla now for the Titans. Nico Falla was a center who came on due to injuries from other centers, and then he had an injury towards ACL. USC had a lot of issues with the centers tearing their ACLs, and he was injured, but he played well last year when he was in, and I think he could definitely make a difference at center there. Josh Fatu is a guy who was at Long Beach State, and then USC got him as a transfer when Kenny Bigelow got hurt. They needed defensive line depth, and they were able to get him in, and he plugged the holes and was useful, productive. I'm not going to say he's one of the most talented guys, but he was useful, has a lot of size, and they could utilize him in the NFL. And then Chris Hawkins, safety for USC. He's a guy who was always making plays, stripping the football. In terms of measurables, I'm not sure if he's where you want to be in terms of size and strength in the NFL, but he's a guy who's quick and knows how to read passes, so he's definitely worth a shot for Seattle to take it in their secondary. And then Deontay Burnett. Deontay Burnett was a guy who really became Sam's #1 target the past 2 years. He got a lot of catches, a lot of targets. Struggled in the Cotton Bowl. I think he had 2 fumbles. So that's something that was critical from NFL scouts, his ball protection. He's a small guy, small. Probably 5'10", 180, but he looks really small when you see him in person. But he could play in the slot, of course. And then Vianney Talamai-Val, another guy who had injuries throughout his career. And he's a big guy. Vianney was probably the biggest guy on USC's roster. And I think he's a guy who will fill a position that Seattle desperately needs help in, the offensive line. They only took one before him, so Seattle has a lot of work to do on the offensive line.
All right, talking college football with Drew Krinsky from Trojan Insider, focusing on USC's storyline concerning the NFL draft with Ronald Jones, Uchenna Nwosu, and Rasheem Green going during the rounds 2 and 3, and then some undrafted free agents that Drew just ran down for us. Let's go to the live chat where we've got a few comments here, but nothing in particular. Do have an Ohio State fan, Drew, that NCIS Fanatic 21, who's with me on a regular basis, who obviously makes the point that it was 24-7 in the Cotton Bowl. Thank you, NCIS Fanatic 21. We got a record of the Cotton Bowl score, 24-7, Ohio State. Very good.
I just realized I think we forgot Sam Darnold too, or I forgot to mention him. Sam Darnold to the Jets.
Yeah, Sam Darnold was drafted at some point. Was that like late 7th round or something like that? Yeah, he actually was selected at some point. Yeah, that's my bad, Drew. I jotted him down before, and I'm like, okay, let's start with Ronald Jones. Yeah, way back when. It seems like it was like 3 weeks ago, Thursday night, Sam Darnold was drafted.
Sam Darnold's going to come in for the Jets and really make an impact. Sam's a guy who had some ball protection issues, had some issues in terms of finding the right pass. But I think when he settles down, he has a chance to be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. He can run the ball, throws a really strong pass, and he's accurate when he finds the right target.
So, Drew, this is what I would have done if I would have been the Browns. I would have gone one of 2 routes here, and neither one of them was Baker Mayfield at number 1. Maybe Baker Mayfield at number 4, but I would have gone either. If I was going to go quarterback, I was going to go Darnold. I think Darnold is the best quarterback of the 4. I don't think it's a slam dunk, but he would have been the guy I would have gone with. I would have went with him at number 1, and then at number 4, taking the best defensive player in Bradley Chubb. Denzel Ward, top corner, should be a tremendous player for the next decade. But I think Bradley Chubb, especially since what they've got with Myles Garrett on the other end of the defensive line, could have been something special, really making it a headache on offensive coordinators to try to slide that protection one way or the other. Or I would have gone Saquon Barkley at number 1, gotten that special freakish back who could be an elite talent for years to come. And then you're going to have 2 quarterbacks off the board, but you got your choice of one of the 2 Joshes most likely at number 4. That's what I would have played had I been the Browns and not gone the Baker Mayfield and then gone Denzel Ward. But we shall see if the Browns have finally righted the ship and made some decent draft picks. You almost can't go wrong when you've got two of the top four. But if anybody's going to go wrong in that spot, it's going to be the Cleveland Browns. And they had four of the top 35 as they had two picks at the top of the second round. So we shall
I'm with
see.
you on that. I mean, Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold, by the time they got to the fourth pick, you're probably going to have one of those two guys available still. So for them to do that, it just didn't seem like it strategically made sense. Go with Barkley, who you know is this freak of nature, will make an impact. We don't know, but it's pretty much a given at this point. And then take your quarterback, be it Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield. So I feel like they might have messed up there.
Yeah, and there was a time there for several years in which the running back was devalued in the NFL because most teams needed two. There wasn't one workhorse anymore in the NFL that could get the job done. But with the success of Todd Gurley and Zeke Elliott and Melvin Gordon, the running back's been valued again. And obviously, teams are willing to jump up and grab a really special one early in the draft. And Saquon Barkley, the character's in play. He's going to work hard for you, do all the right things. And then the freakish athletic ability. It just seems like he's close to a can't miss. There's no such thing, but he's about as close as it gets. Don't really see anything worthwhile on the chat. Big Poppy JT chimes in with some really good comments. He does think that your Seattle Seahawks might have missed it and not going with Darius Geis. So we'll switch to the Seattle draft and get your thoughts from top to bottom on how well you think Pete Carroll and company did. Of course, the headliner, not necessarily at the top, it was Shaquem Griffin going, and the feel-good story of not him just being overcoming all the adversity, but this guy's just a great football player and one of the four players in FBS football over the last 2 years to have double-digit sacks and I believe pass breakups. So he's just been an exceptional story, but we'll let you run through Seattle's draft top to bottom.
Sure. So we'll start at the top. Rashad Penny, he's a running back who every time I've seen him live, I've been blown out of the water with him. Tears up defenders, speed, power, and vision with him. I think he's a really good pick, and I'm anxious to see him out there. Obviously, he's going to have to work around a questionable offensive line. We'll see who they get in the offseason still, but Seattle's offensive line is certainly the weakest position on their team, so he's going to have to use his strength a lot, but I'm looking forward to him. Obviously, Rasheem Green, we tackled that. He's a motor on the defense in a position where we now need someone. Will Dissly was the fourth-round pick number 120, tight end from Washington. He's a bigger guy. We needed a tight end that could block. Jimmy Graham didn't always block for us, and when you have our offensive line, it's worth giving up a tight end that can really catch the ball for a guy who can block well, and Will be that guy who can block. And then round 5, pick 141, Shaquem Griffin. I am excited for this guy. I mean, there's a lot of talks that Shaquem would be picked earlier in the draft. A lot of Seahawk fans are saying, hey, take him in the third round, take him in the fourth. It's still a chance with him. I mean, I don't want to be a doubter, but obviously with one hand, you're going against different competition, bigger guys. It could be hard to get leverage off these guys. But at round 5, I think it's the perfect time to get him. Team up with his brother, brings a lot of energy. The fans are excited. I think it's a good pick for Seattle just in general. Trey Flowers, the cornerback, pick 146. I think he played safety too. He's a guy who has a lot of speed and a lot of power in a position where we now need a cornerback. Richard Sherman's gone. We have Shaquille Griffin. We just signed Byron Maxwell to another deal. But Byron Maxwell is a guy who I don't think is consistent enough to be a starting cornerback. Maybe a couple years back he could have been, but he got beat a lot recently. And Trey Flowers is a guy who has that speed, who can compete with the top guys, and he has that strength. Round 5, pick 149. The punter out of Texas. I have not had a chance to see his punch yet. I kind of remember him punting the ball well against USC in the game earlier this year, but I haven't looked at that. I hear he's an Aussie-style rugby punter. That should be interesting. Jamarco Jones, big tackle from Ohio State. Seattle needed more tackles. I kind of hope that they would get more offensive line guys, especially in round 6 too. They went with Jacob Martin, the defensive end. I think they should have gone offensive line again there, but they didn't. I'm sure they have some kind of plan in mind. They're usually good at the draft. And then the last pick, Alex, I might butcher this, McGough from FIU. He's a quarterback who I watched his tape earlier today. Always finds guys on the corner. He has a good arm. We just signed a cornerback too, so now we have 3 on the roster. It'll be interesting to see how he goes. There were still talks that they might sign Kaepernick. I don't know what the status on that is. I think they need to stack up on O-line, and Kaepernick's going to require some money, so I don't think that's really the move for them
No, what you're saying there, Drew, is definitely something that's been reinforced by Pete Carroll in recent days leading up to the draft about the offensive line. He said, when we went to Super Bowls, it was the offensive line. Obviously, the defense was lights out, and Russell Wilson made plays, but Russell Wilson has had to carry this offense probably more than any other quarterback in the NFL over the past season. I think I heard a crazy stat that Russell Wilson accounted for every Seattle touchdown except for one, meaning he threw them all, of course, but he also ran for all the touchdowns minus just one rushing touchdown last season. So that's crazy. So the offensive line and Marshawn Lynch back in the day 4 or 5 years ago was the formula, and they want to get back to that.
Yeah, Seattle struggled to find a consistent running back last year. Thomas Rawls, still coming back from injury, was never really as dominant as he once was. And the one guy who was doing well early on in the year, Chris Carson from Oregon State, got hurt after his first or second game. So there goes that. Poor Russell Wilson, though. I mean, last year it was him running in circles. I mean, for him to get the ball off, he had to run around 7 times and just hope no one was near him. It was not easy to be a Seattle quarterback. And hopefully they get more guys this year. I still think it's going to be a position of weakness, and I haven't seen too many transactions there to give me any more confidence than I've had last year. But hopefully they find somebody. I'm sure they will. They can't just forget about the offensive line. They've heard about it a lot. Every analyst is talking about Seattle's weak offensive line. They have to make moves, and I trust they will.
I'm going to try to handle this one question, and Drew, you can certainly chime in if you've got anything on this, being a Pac-12 guy. But okay. Big Poppy JT is just driving us crazy. Multiple questions about Hercules Mafa'ata, who is the Washington State defensive tackle. Now, the guy's a monster. He gets into the backfield. He's a disruptor. He was supposed to be a third-round grade who slipped out of the draft. I can't tell you why he wasn't drafted, but if you really crunch the numbers, so look at it and look at the number of guys entering the NFL draft and then the grades that they give these guys can't all be drafted. You keep hearing this guy's got a 3rd-round grade and this guy's got a top 2-round grade and so forth. There's too many grades and too many guys rated with 1st, 2nd, 3rd-round grades, whatever level you want to put it at, for the number of slots. So there's always guys that fall out of the draft. There's not an issue with his character, from what I know. It's just a numbers game. Obviously, if the match doesn't come up where maybe somebody really liked him, but they liked somebody a little bit better, and then he fell another 25 spots because nobody was looking for a player at that position, he'll be in a camp. I'm sure he's signed as we speak. He was a really productive player at Washington State. And I hope to get my Washington State guy, Scott Brewster, on here in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about Mafa'ata for you. But he signed with the Vikings. What's that, Drew?
He signed with the Vikings earlier. I remember him going against USC earlier this year when Washington State beat USC in a tough game. He gave a lot of trouble to the offensive line. I mean, he was in the face of Sam Darnold a lot of speed and a lot of strength for that guy. I remember seeing him, and that was a nightmare to watch for me. But I think he definitely should have ended up in the draft with that kind of speed.
So we got Drew Krinsky on the line from Trojan Insider, breaking down the USC NFL draft with, of course, Sam Darnold, Ronald Jones, Uchenna Nwosu, and Rasheem Green. So if you're joining us late and want to catch that, obviously, once we conclude, this entire segment gets posted to YouTube. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and push us over the 5,000 subscriber mark and beyond there. And, of course, the audio versions are on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. And Drew also has set us up well with the Seattle Seahawks, being a big Seahawks fan, and you got to join him there at Trojan Insider. for the best in USC. There you go. The Hawks, who of
There you
course should
go.
have had 2 consecutive Super Bowl championships,
Woo.
decided not to run inside the 3-yard line with Marshawn Lynch after he had just gained like a 3 or 4 yard carry. But that's what's going to become infamous in Super Bowl history and already has.
Definitely.
There's a knock, Drew, and we see it in the chat here on USC quarterbacks. Now, of course, Carson Palmer, extremely successful, not an elite Hall of Fame type quarterback, but probably on that next line, very productive throughout his career. Other than that, Mark Sanchez didn't necessarily turn out, although his team was really good when he first hit the league, and they went to 2 AFC championship games, and the rest of his career kind of slumped down and declined. Trying to think who else has been drafted in recent years. So I'm not a big believer. Of course, yeah, Matt Barkley, who was, man, the decline that Matt Barkley suffered, who was going to come out after his junior year, and some projected him as a top 5 pick, and then he was drafted like a 3rd or 4th round, something in that range a year later by the Eagles. But the one thing I think that gets a little bit overplayed here, Drew, is that people look at the history at a particular position at a particular school and say either, yeah, you go after that LSU defensive backs, Ohio State defensive backs, Penn State linebackers, or whatever it is, or on the other side, Penn State running backs have always faltered, or pick the position that's faltered. And now you could say possibly USC quarterbacks. I don't necessarily buy into that unless there's been a particular scheme and a particular coaching staff in place during that entire time that would lend you to believe, okay, this is a college position and they're not prepping these guys for the NFL. They're certainly great college players, but the system and the coaching doesn't prepare them for the NFL. So I don't know that we can necessarily say that with USC quarterbacks. What are your thoughts?
I mean, that is fair to say that Mark Sanchez and other guys haven't panned out well, but I think Sam Darnold's a different beast. I think he brings a different skill set to the table. They ran a pro-style offense with a little bit of runs from Darnold with options. I think Darnold's just a different guy. And these guys came in with a bunch of hype too. Matt Barkley, Mark Sanchez, 5 stars, got to get him out there. With Darnold, it was more of an emergence from him. He showed up to camp, and they're like, whoa, all right, this guy's actually really good. Originally, they took Ricky Town in that class. He was the 5-star. Darnold was the 4-star. People are saying, what are we doing with this guy? And then Ricky Town immediately kind of figured out Darnold was the real deal, and he had to get out of USC pretty quick. I think Darnold is going to be a guy who will succeed in the NFL if he can figure out the right places to throw the ball. That's my biggest concern with him. I thought his decision-making was questionable at times. He aired the ball out too much, but I think that's something that NFL coaches can fix and train him up on.
All right, Big Poppy JT, let me take this one on. All Pac-12 teams are overrated. Besides Oregon, the Pac-12 has not been to a national championship game since 05 versus Texas. Also, last time a Big 12 team was in the national championship. Okay. Well, first of all, Oklahoma went to a national championship game 3 years after that in 2008, but I get your point. Okay. If you crunch the numbers and look at the performance of the Pac-12 year in, year out, if you go back about 4 years, go back to 2014, the Pac-12 was arguably at that point, and a lot has changed since then, but was arguably the best conference in college football. I still felt it was the SEC, but if you crunch the numbers, the Pac-12 came through a bowl season in which they finished all their Power 5 games at 13-5 that season. They were extremely good. And if you looked at the depth of the Pac-12, there were no bottom feeders a la Kansas, Purdue at the time, those kind of programs. Now, Oregon State's awful right now, but besides them, there aren't those bottom feeders in the Pac-12. It's a very deep conference. Yes, there are not elite schools like Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia in the Pac-12 right now. So I would consider the Pac-12 right now, after the Big 12 was the worst for quite a long time, to probably be the worst of the Power Fives. But I think it's close, and I think the ability and the potential of programs like Oregon to come back, UCLA needs to come back. those have been the two downers for the Pac-12 in their decline in the last few years, is that Oregon's gone from top 5 to like top 40, and UCLA's dropped from like top 15 to top 40 or 50.
Yeah.
And Arizona State's down a little bit as well, although they bounced back with 7 wins and a bowl appearance. So your thoughts about the Pac-12, Drew?
I'll have to agree with that. I think there definitely has been some overrated things about the Conference of Champions, the Pac-12. But I think this is a whole new year. You have a lot of new coaches. Edwards coming in at Arizona State, Sumlin at Arizona, UCLA, obviously, new coach there. Stanford. I mean, there's a lot of good coaches now. This is a whole conference now. I think it's going to be a whole new year. Recruiting will get better. I think this is going to be decisive how these guys do. But the Pac-12, in terms of, if you look at bowl play too last year, if I'm not mistaken, I think Pac-12 lost almost all the bowls that they played in. So they obviously there's work to be done.
Yeah, no question about that. The Pac-12, I believe, at 1-7, trying to pick up that win. I believe it was Utah over West Virginia. That was the big victory for the Pac-12 last year. Got matched up against the Big Ten quite a few times, and those were difficult assignments against Ohio State, Penn State. You're talking about probably a top 5 team and a top 10 team in Penn State. Michigan State took care of Washington State pretty easily as well. Ricky, it has to be some sort of NCAA violation that Oregon is allowed to use 1 billion uniform combinations. Okay, Ricky, USC's all-time Rose Bowl performance. What's that?
I like the uniforms, though. It is cool to see.
Yeah, it's not something I would want to see Alabama do, but it's Oregon. They had to do something to get on the map, and it worked. And for a good 5 to 10 year stretch, they were as relevant as anyone in college football and collected the money and turned out to be a power. And it hasn't necessarily held, but when you consider the lockdown that USC, Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Alabama, LSU, Florida State pretty much have on college football, there's about 8 to 10 schools that have a lockdown on college football, that Oregon was able to break into that, and Clemson now. Those would be the only 2 examples I could give you in recent years to break that blue blood line and get into it. And Oregon was legitimately a top 5 program there for close to 10 years. So it worked.
It did. And the whole Nike thing, I mean, it helps with the recruits too. Those kids love to go out to Oregon. They had their spring game. I think everyone, like a lot of the local California kids who, they could have been going to USC and other places, they all went to Oregon. That spring game was a big draw for the recruits. And it's cool to be there. I've been out there. It's an impressive place because of the Nike field, because of Nike pumping in money, making the place look nice, cool jerseys. The kids like that stuff, so that helps them kind of recruit. And obviously they have a good coaching staff now too, or we'll see. But in terms of recruiting, they're recruiting pretty well.
Yeah, when you look at these programs now, what they need to do to attract these kids is different than what it was 10 to 15 years ago with social media. Unless you're Nick Saban or Urban Meyer that can just walk into a living room and gain recognition and respect automatically, those guys don't need to really change anything. But look at what Dabo Swinney does and the way he acts, the way he treats players, the way he plays with them, dances with them in the locker room. That's what you got to do, unless you have the 3 or 5 or 6 national championships next to your name. And that's definitely what's been done there at Clemson. It's worked for Dabo Swinney. And we mentioned Oregon prior with Chip Kelly. And mentioning Chip Kelly, you probably, Drew, I'm thinking, know more about UCLA football than most people, probably right after USC. Your thoughts about Chip Kelly at UCLA, and if that scares USC fans at all, and B, Josh Rosen, since you've probably seen him play quite a few times, as well as I have. Your thoughts about Josh Rosen at the next level?
Yeah, I think Josh Rosen is going to be very successful at Arizona. I think he's a guy of the 4 quarterbacks. I mean, of the top, Allen, Mayfield, Darnold, and Rosen. I'd say Rosen's probably the guy that you can be the most sure about will pan out. because he was consistent. His throws are super accurate. His decision making was pretty good. I thought he was probably the safest pick out of all those guys. And I think he'll do well in Arizona for sure. Definitely has a chip on his shoulder. We'll see. We'll see how he pans out. But he obviously a lot of USC fans and other fans like to point out he's immature, he's young, he says stupid things, has a hot tub in his room. But I think on the field he was on the money. And they struggled at UCLA before him. I don't think Jim Moore really had the program down the past 4 years, and I don't think he really cared too much. It seemed like he was kind of cool with cashing his paycheck and didn't really mind to get out. Chip Kelly coming in will bring a whole new energy in terms of recruiting too. It's exciting playing for Chip Kelly. I mean, the teams he had for Oregon, they did well. He's been away from the college game for a little bit, but to see him come back now, it'll be interesting.
I was a bit surprised at how things ended with Jim Mora based on how things started at UCLA with Jim Mora. So you bring in an NFL guy, and we've seen it time and time again that the NFL guy is typically the smartest guy in the room. There was a reason that he coached at that level, and he usually has the jump on his competition. So Jim Mora takes over a marginal UCLA team and rights the ship to a certain extent. We had heard that prior to Jim Mora arriving in Westwood, that they had no discipline, that they had guys taking days off of practice, and he really instituted respect and professionalism and fight and grit. And we're going to run this as a first-class elite program, like you would think at UCLA. And the program took off to a certain extent, but they peaked that one Brett Hundley season just prior to Josh Rosen. They finished with 10 wins that year. They beat Kansas State in a decent bowl game, the Alamo Bowl. They finished in the top 10, and that was the crescendo. Then he brings in Josh Rosen. You figure, oh, this program's going to continue to take off. He picked it. He was bringing in top 10 to 15 recruiting classes for 2 to 3 consecutive years. And I thought the program was set up to take off, but Josh Rosen gets hurt. 2 of his 3 campaigns in UCLA, they don't surround him with the kind of talent that he needed. And it just went belly up for Jim Mora, and he kind of lost control and really missed his window of opportunity to take over there in the Pac-12 South.
Yeah, it was scary for USC fans when Josh Rosen was coming in, and they signed the number 1 running back, Soso Jamabo, in that class as well. Sosa never really panned out as well. But UCLA still, every year they had talent. Vanderdoes, they had Lasley last year who tore up USC. They had a bunch of talented guys, but they were struck by injuries, and I think that kept them down. And really, it just seemed like Moore's effort started to die down, and they started to fall apart. So I think Chip Kelly is going to be good for them.
All right, we got Drew Krinsky on the line from Trojan Insider, breaking down USC's side of the NFL draft with Sam Darnold, Ronald Jones, Uchenna Nwosu, and Rasheem Green, with Darnold going to the Jets. The Bucks pick up Jones. The Chargers get Nwosu, and Green, it goes to Seattle. And Drew also helped us out on the Seattle Seahawks, and we're taking your comments as well. Hey, Drew, before we let you go, obviously a lot to talk about between the end of spring camp and getting us fired up for the first week of August. Just your thoughts about the USC program. It all starts with that quarterback position, obviously, with JT Daniels, much anticipated, stepping onto campus, and just your thoughts about what you think will need to be addressed once we hit August.
Yeah, so quarterback, I think JT Daniels is going to come in and take control of the team. We'll have Amon-Ra St. Brown, his teammate from Mater Dei, coming in. Those guys connect really well. St. Brown is just a beast of a wide receiver. He'll fill in the slot. They'll connect. I think it really could be a good year for USC if they can get that down. The defense looked good this spring. Just some questions on the cornerback, Biggie Marshall, and then who's the other guy? Jack Jones was out this spring. Haven't heard much on him. He was a guy who got picked on often, and a guy who I think could lose his starting job. They have Elijah Griffin, Isaac Taylor-Stewart, both 5 stars coming in. Jonathan Lockett, who showed up this spring and had a really, really good campaign. I think there's a lot of competition in a lot of positions, and that's healthy. But the one area of concern, of course, O-line, that's been an area of concern for USC really a lot last year. That's going to be the big question. They have new guys coming in. How can they fill that role? And that will really define where USC can go, I feel.
So I'd like to remind everyone to subscribe to my YouTube channel for the very best in college football coverage. We bring on the best media contributors you're going to find anywhere, including Drew Krinsky from Trojan Insider, 97 media contributors from places like Bleacher Report, SB Nation, ESPN, Big Ten Network, 24/7 Sports, all over the place last year. And we've got plenty more coming on. I'm going to let you know that over the next couple of weeks, I've got a scheduling series, Drew. So I'm fixing college football scheduling. I have fixed the conference schedules and the non-conference schedules. I'm going to release that. Also, once we get into the off season, wanted to clear the spring camps and spring games, and then get us into the off season and talk about quarterback battles across the country and give my odds as to who's going to win the various quarterback battles. We talk about USC front and center, got one at Clemson, Ohio State, Michigan, all over the place to talk about. We will try to get to as many positional units across the country as well, talk about the top 10 at every position across the board in college football and the top 5 at various positions in each conference. And believe me, I've got all sorts of content ideas, going to unveil my playoff system as well in the coming months, as we've got our dead time between the end of spring camp and the first week of August, and before that, media days. But believe me, on Mark Rogers TV, we've got plenty to dive into concerning college football to get everyone set for 2018. And of course, I'm going to rate all the schedules, in which USC is rated extremely high in recent years. Going to rate all the schedules of the Power 5 teams, 68 all the way up to number 1. All right, Drew, we appreciate you jumping on board and doing a ton of work for us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
All right, guys, we appreciate you jumping on the live chat. If you've got any suggestions on content that you would like to hear from me, definitely bring those on as well, and leave your comments and questions and your suggestions on comment. And I appreciate you guys jumping on the live chat, and we will do more of these. We've got Michigan, Texas, and more NFL draft coming up on Sunday. We've got Miami talk coming up on Monday. All right, Drew, we appreciate it. You have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good one.